Well, good evening and welcome to the webinar tonight that we're calling Before the Knock, How to Prepare for Immigration Enforcement. And my name is Steve Allred. I am with the Church State Council down here in California. We're a religious liberty ministry of the Pacific Union Conference, and I am here with attorney Andre Wang. Andre, good to see you.
Thanks, Steve. Good to see you. Good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And let me just tell our viewers a little bit about you. Mr. Wang serves as General Counsel and Director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty for the North Pacific Union Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, I think based up in Washington State, right? He's also an adjunct instructor at Walla Walla University. Andre serves as on the Board of Trustees of Adventist Health Portland and just concluded a term as a member of the Oregon Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Prior to his current position, Andre practiced federal immigration law in the areas of business and employment-based immigration. And so, Andre, you are really the perfect person to be talking about the topic tonight, which, obviously is immigration and how we are, really should respond to that. And also kind of in the context, perhaps, of folks who may be watching. There might be leaders of churches and, nonprofits and things of that nature, which you work, obviously in that area as well. So that's a good combination. For our viewers who might be wondering why we are having this webinar today, beyond the obvious answer of, well, obviously immigration is a big issue in our country right now, but why is the Church State Council, a ministry of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, sponsoring this? As a ministry of the Adventist Church here in the Pacific Union, we have many members in our congregations who are immigrants. Some of them are undocumented, and many of them have legal status. But even the folks who have legal status are often wondering what their future will be. And so as a faith-based organization, first of all, we affirm the principles of Scripture that tell us to treat the foreigner with kindness and respect, and to do to others as we would have them do unto us. And we also remember that Jesus tells us that when we welcome the foreigner, we are welcoming him, which is a pretty, I think, important thing to remember there in Matthew chapter 25. Now, our conversation today centers around information on the current state of immigration policy and enforcement in the United States, and practical guidance on how to respond to that policy and enforcement. I want to just say that, as Christians and as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, we believe in following the law of the land as long as we can do so while remaining faithful to what God has asked us to do. And obviously there's some individual conscience thrown in there too, where people sometimes may choose, hey, I'm going to break this law because my conscience leads me to. That's between that person and God. So what we present today is simply an overview of what the law is, or how it is or is not being enforced by federal immigration enforcement today. We're not here to tell people to go break the law. That's not our mission or goal. We're simply presenting, hey, what are your rights and how should you respond? And obviously there's some area there that's, people have to make their own personal decisions on how to deal with certain things. I want to also say that this is not legal advice. Well, Andre is an attorney. I am as well. We're not here to give you personal legal advice. We can present legal information, but it may not fit your situation. And so you really need to go sit down and talk with an attorney, immigration or otherwise, one-on-one, to get that legal advice for your own situation here. So take this all kind of in that context. And so I think with that, we'll get started. And Andre, you'd like to show some slides, correct?
Yeah.
And so we'll put those up here on the screen, and then we'll get started here with this discussion. Anything else we should preface it with, Andre, before we get started?
Yeah, well, actually, you covered kind of the intro that I was going to cover was that let's be very clear that the information in this webinar is not to circumvent federal or state law. Always comply with the law. So the point of this information is to provide two things: what to expect and how to be prepared for a potential immigration enforcement action. And
Okay.
and so that's this information is not legal advice, and we're not going to go into some of the issues about status and how to repair or fix a status. I mean, that can be that gets very complicated and is very specialized to a particular situation. So
Right.
consult with an immigration attorney for that information.
That makes sense. All right. So let's start with this question, Andre. What is the current state of immigration enforcement activity today in the United States?
So we are in trying times. In recent months, there have been both localized immigration crackdowns in Chicago, Memphis, Charlotte, North Carolina, and we now have heard next is New Orleans. But nationwide, we're seeing just a ramp up of general immigration enforcement. So we're seeing localized enforcement, of cities where that ICE has targeted. But generally, we're just seeing it nationwide. And what we're seeing are federal agents taking unfettered measures in investigating and apprehending individuals. Today, I saw a video of Border Patrol agents in Southern California checking on the immigration status of customers at eating at a food truck. But yes, apprehensions have been aggressive and even violent. And just last week, ICE reported the highest number of detainees in custody. 66,000 detainees are currently being held. Wow. That is 70% higher than this time last year when it was 9,000. So ICE reports that they have the capacity to hold 70,000. So that's they're reaching that threshold. 71% of those in custody do not have criminal convictions. So the narrative of we're going for the worst of the worst, people who have criminal convictions and things, that statistic is interesting when you hold it up against that narrative.
And for those who may doubt those statistics, where are you getting those numbers?
They're coming from Department of Homeland Security.
Okay, so they're self-reporting that, and that's what you're saying as far as the criminal conviction aspect of that. Interesting. And so, obviously here in the United States, we are a nation that has a lot of immigrants, whether people who've been here a generation or more, or people who have come here themselves. My ancestors were immigrants, right? So, I mean, when we think about immigration in the Adventist Church, which we're an Adventist organization, the North Pacific Union, where you're coming from, is an Adventist organization. A lot of immigrants in our churches as well, because of the fact that here in the United States, that's our mission field. That's who we're reaching, right? How is what's happening that you just described affecting church members and church attendance?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're seeing this nationwide, but at least in my region here in the Pacific Northwest, you simply have people afraid to go to church or even go out in public. We are hearing of stories of churches canceling events, men's retreats and women's retreats, or Pathfinder outings, or what have you, just because they are concerned about an immigration enforcement action happening when you have people gathered for a church event. So that's the impact that we're seeing is, actually not only just social activities, but worship, where attendance is down, or I've heard in some cases, I believe in California and areas of the Southwest that some churches are not even holding services because members are too afraid to come out for worship.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're seeing in churches, and even reports of students not even going to school, particularly in areas where we have large Latino and minority populations. Our public schools, you hear they're seeing a decline in school attendance as well.
And are all of those people who are not attending, do we know if they're not attending because they're undocumented, or is it just fear even of those who might be documented?
Yeah. We don't know. But you can, you can kind of just see that, just the climate of fear that that's being instilled in our population.
Well,
it could be anything.
Sure. And let me ask a question that, let me just throw this out, because of those who are being detained, do we know how many are undocumented as opposed to might have some sort of legal status when they are detained? Because my understanding is that the federal government is oftentimes detaining people who do have status, and they're coming in, check in, and they get detained, right?
Yes. And I don't I don't know if I don't have that statistic on me. I wonder if it's out there, but in actuality, if somebody does have status, they should be released, and we're hearing stories of even U.S. citizens being caught up and detained, but then eventually being released when their status is determined.
Okay.
And so whether U.S. citizen, permanent resident, or some sort of other legal visa status, there really isn't a need to detain that person. So
sure.
It's a good question, a good statistic to look up.
So, I do personally know of Adventist members, for example, that have been detained here in the Pacific Union Territory. Do we know of any enforcement actions taking place at any of our churches or schools within the North American Division, let's say?
Yeah, none that we know of. And actually, this is something that we are intentionally monitoring very closely, because we want to know if an enforcement action happens on any of our church properties, whether it be a church or one of our schools, and this goes all the way up to the General Conference, and Todd McFarland, the new General Counsel for the church. We have our team of church lawyers are monitoring this because we definitely want to know if this happens, and how that how it impacts the people in that school or church. So, but fortunately, we can report as of today, we don't have any reports of anything happening on church properties in North America.
Mm-hmm. Even though we do believe it's affecting attendance and things of that nature, but
Right.
No enforcement that we know of. So the NAD, the North American Division, did issue a memo, about I think back in March, I think it wasn't it April, somewhere in there. Guidance for churches and schools within the North American Division territory on what to do in the event that they are the subject of federal immigration enforcement. Can you walk us through some of that guidance to refresh our memories for those who may not know, or who might have forgotten that information?
Yeah. So this is a document that was issued by the North American Division, and it's available on the North American Division website. You can you can just Google it and it'll come right up. But it really gives just general guidance for our church leadership and school leadership on what happens if you are visited by an immigration enforcement agent. Now, this was issued earlier this year, before before the operation and exercise of raids. This is really given in the context of if your church or school is visited for an investigation or for an inquiry of somebody who may be there. And so here's the basic guidance is number one, don't consent. Don't consent to the entry or presence of the agents on the property. Our properties are private property, and so we have the right. We have the right to not consent and ask them to leave. And so that's the really the first paragraph, I believe, of the guidance is don't consent to their entry, and politely ask them to leave. Also, you want to designate one person to speak on behalf of the church or school. One person with authority, whether that's the pastor or an elder or a school principal, but you want to designate one person. The last thing you need is some well-meaning but intrusive church member who just decides that they can just go up to a federal agent and try to deal with the situation. You want somebody who can speak on behalf of not only the church as an organization, but also the membership or the students if it's a school. Ask for identification. If an agent is presenting themselves, you can ask for identification. And interestingly, this is a side note. There are some ICE field offices that are adopting policies that agents identify themselves as federal officers because we are seeing kind of a rash of assault crimes and robberies in the country happening by perpetrators pretending to be ICE agents. And so I think that they're realizing, this kind of this renegade agents kind of bursting in, that was just a report that I heard, but if you are visited in a church or a school, ask for identification, ask for them to present credentials, and assert the right to remain silent. Now we're all familiar with this by watching cop shows and things, but it applies to us in an investigation when you are being questioned by a law enforcement officer. Even if you're not the suspect, you have the right to remain silent. And so if they are asking for information or for documentation, you have the right to refuse and exercise that right to remain silent, regardless of your immigration status. This applies to citizens and non-citizens. Now, don't physically interfere with an agent. If an agent starts to be more brazen and perhaps maybe overreach of authority, don't physically interfere. Just document it. But yeah, you be physically interfering can end up being bad news for you as well. And so, don't physically interfere, but document what's happening, and then also don't interfere with an enforcement investigation or action. And this can be a situation where you could be arrested for obstruction or even aiding and abetting. And so there have already been cases where charges have been filed where someone has told a church member or someone in the household, hey, ICE is outside, and they do something for them to let's say go through the back door or something. That could be something that could bring charges against you for assisting and for obstruction. So there's consequences for interfering with an investigation or an agent.
People have to be aware of that. Yeah, and so I think it was back in March when the Trump administration revoked the sensitive location kind of restriction on ICE agents or immigration agents to go into churches and schools and hospitals and things of that nature, and kind of took the gloves off, if you will, in that area. And so I think this memo was one of lots of different things that were in reaction to that. So if ICE agents are not at least coming into Adventist churches at this point, where are they most commonly conducting their enforcement actions?
Yeah, usually outside of facilities, whether it be a school, a church, workplace, and actually we're actually hearing more frequent actions on workplaces, workplace raids, as we hear them. So, but just here in the Portland area, a student was detained during his school lunch period. Now it was off campus. He had left campus for lunch break, and he was detained. He was taken into custody. Turned out he's a U.S. citizen, and so when they got that straightened out, he was released later that afternoon. So what we're seeing is actually what they've always done is when they suspect somebody is in a facility, whether it's a school, church, hospital, business, they'll just sit outside and wait. And that's what's leading to a lot of the footage that we're seeing on the news and social media is, they're waiting in a public space, whether it be out in the street or in a parking lot. And so, we're not seeing the kind of the breaking into the building because of there's certain Fourth Amendment search and seizure rules about that, and we won't get into the weeds on that. But yeah, that's why they will just sit outside and wait.
Yeah, I mean, although there have been, I think in Chicago, they were basically, they must have had a warrant to get into that apartment building that they landed on top of the helicopter. I'm assuming, right?
Right, yeah,
pretty big. So, and here's a question actually on that. You mentioned the student who ended up being a U.S. citizen that was detained. What recourse would a U.S. citizen have if they are detained? And are there any consequences to the individual ICE officers or, damages that a citizen could, potentially get if they were to sue the government for, some sort of an illegal or for being detained under these circumstances?
Yeah, I think that this is kind of an area of new litigation.
Yeah.
There is so there is a civil rights hotline that within the Department of Homeland Security that does exist, that is set up for reports of violation of rights, and so that I saw and I wish I had jotted down the website because that would be a good resource to put up. But that is something that every person, whether it's a U.S. citizen or not, to kind of keep track and document whether your rights have been violated. And in the case of the student, I think it sounded like things happened pretty expeditiously because he was picked up at noon, and I think that once they figured out what was going on, he was released that same day. Now we're seeing kind of people being roughed up and ICE is not in the customer service business, but unfortunately being roughed up is and when I say roughed up, I mean I would say they're not saying please and kind of treating you gingerly. That's when you're talking about an abuse of or a violation of rights, I mean we're talking about was there physical harm.
Physical harm. What about property damage? Let's say they break your window. They get in. I'm assuming there could be some lawsuits based on those types of things as well. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And
Was that over? What was that action? Did that constitute overreach? So yeah. So I think that in the coming, months and years, we're going to see where this litigation goes as far as claims against the federal government.
Yeah. Which we know is difficult, generally speaking. There has to be some sort of right of action, cause of action. So on, I think just as another matter that we might want to clear up for our viewers, people have talked to me and say, wait, do immigrants actually have rights? If you're not a citizen, do you actually have, like constitutional, rights, let's say? And maybe just give us a brief kind of overview of what rights you could say, constitutionally, for example, someone who's not a citizen would have.
Yeah. Well, actually, a non-citizen enjoys the same rights as a citizen does. There's when it comes to Fourth Amendment search and seizure and Fifth Amendment due process and the right to remain silent. That applies to everyone. And so really the rights that someone has in a law enforcement or government action applies whether you're a citizen or not. And so that's a good, Steve, that's actually a good point to emphasize, is that a lot of people, citizens even, they'll say, oh well, if you're not a citizen, then it doesn't apply to you. But no, it's not true. And if you are not a citizen, please know that that you are entitled to invoke those rights if you find yourself in a situation like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think just as a basic constitutional matter, you read the Constitution and it talks about all persons, right? Not all citizens, but all persons have these due process rights, which I think the courts have recognized in our laws. I would say, though, it does seem that there is a diminished, some of the fundamental rights perhaps might be neutered a bit. I mean, for example, in the context of those who are green card holders, we've seen some enforcement or some revoking of status, if they've engaged in speech that the federal government didn't think was, they thought was somehow, adverse to the United States interests, right? Like pro-Palestine stuff or whatever. And I think that must be some sort of a law that allows them to revoke visas for certain people who are holding those visas, right?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, and that's also a good point to emphasize is that federal law gives immigration or in the area of immigration wide areas of enforcement, so for example, just in the last year, since the Trump administration, more than 80,000 visas have been revoked, summarily. And the government has the right to do that because the government can issue visas and they can revoke visas. Of those, about 8,000 of them were student visas because of, like you mentioned, of whether it be criminal activity or unwanted speech, conduct or behavior.
Sure.
But the reasons for revoking a visa can be for criminal matters or for any visa violation, overstay, working without authorization, misrepresentation in getting the visa, or conduct that the government doesn't want you to be engaging in. So visas are really an at-will, to invoke an employment term, and kind of an at-will benefit for immigrants.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. So let's talk about kind of those who are, the highest at risk of being arrested or detained. I know that a couple of months ago, a federal court, I think it was end of July, a federal court in Los Angeles found that ICE was racially profiling, people of color. I mean, I think they were going after folks who spoke with an accent and worked certain types of jobs and maybe had a certain type of skin color, right? And so the court said, no, you can't do that. But that was, I think the Supreme Court basically put a stay on that injunction. And so they're still able to do that, is my understanding currently. So what can you tell us about individuals who are, the highest risk of being arrested or detained?
Yeah. Those are, as the president mentioned, he always says, the highest risk are those that have, are the criminals.
Sure.
People who have criminal histories and criminal convictions. And yeah, I mean, that continues to be, I think that continues to be the case.
As it should, I would say, hopefully, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we want that.
But in reality, I think that, we're not seeing that kind of triage of the worst of the worst versus the person who's on a visa overstay. So that hierarchy of, the highest risk, the lowest risk, I think the line is blurred over the last couple months, where really, I mean, it's just like, if there's any visa violation or immigration violation, there's a level of risk, but really, if you're kind of like looking at, okay, kind of where do I fall, kind of in the risk level, it's people with criminal histories, criminal convictions, and then also those who have didn't enter the U.S. Legally. So this means they didn't have a visa when they came in. It was a what we call an entry without inspection. So those are kind of the highest pool, risk pool of people who are at risk of being detained.
Okay. Now, I was just yesterday actually with a group of individuals who are from Afghanistan, and they're, they invoked refugee status and came over here, talking with some of them about their stories. I mean, it's pretty crazy what they went through, and I'm glad they're here. They are glad they're here. They're like, if we went back, I was talking to one individual, he worked, I think he must have offered assistance to the U.S. military, basically like we would die essentially, and a lot of my understanding is that a lot of the Afghanis and others are here under sort of like a temporary protected status, and they're kind of going for their green card, et cetera. I know with, for example, a group of Venezuelans, the temporary protected status early on was revoked, and I assume many of those were then rounded up and detained and deported. What can you tell us about how that works? Is it at the whim of the administration that they can just revoke temporary protected status? Is there any, could someone then go to court and say, hey, you can't do this? And could the, court system then say, no, you can't revoke this status for these people whose lives might be in danger if they get sent back to Afghanistan? What can you tell us about that briefly?
Right. So briefly, temporary protected status, also known as TPS, is essentially a humanitarian program where the government extends temporary status to someone from a country, usually a country designated with a high level of conflict. So we're seeing, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Venezuela. And so over the years, the list of countries has kind of piled up, and so the part of the president's immigration policy, he's cutting back on some of these countries. In fact, today, Myanmar or Burma was removed for termination of TPS status effective next January. But there is litigation going on. I know that Venezuela was one that had TPS revoked or terminated, but there's litigation where it's kind of an on again, off again. Courts reinstated, and so that's climbing the appellate ladder in the courts. But TPS status, interestingly, is not a visa status. It is not and essentially it's not a legal status. Really, what it is it's what the T is, temporary, and really was not designed to be a path, if you will, or an ongoing immigration process, but really kind of a humanitarian vehicle for people from these conflict ridden countries to have safe space in the United States, and then as conflict de-escalates, then the designation would be removed, and then it would be safe for them to go back. Now, obviously, we have serious situations around the world where it's not safe to go back, but yet certain designations are being revoked. So in a nutshell, yeah, that's what we're seeing with TPS status. And again, it's part of the president's campaign pledge. He campaigned on this issue of immigration enforcement, and so that's what we're seeing now.
Sure. So let's get practical here for individuals, right? We've talked about guidance for churches and schools a bit, and people who want more information on that can go to that NAD memo. But what can individuals do now in anticipation of possible immigration enforcement? What documents should they have with them? What precautions should they take, et cetera?
Yeah. So here's where we really kind of cut to the chase, and really the best thing that an individual do to be prepared is to carry documentation with them, and there's kind of different levels of first of all, it's important to carry just identification, government issued identification, because that identifies who you are, and so really that's basically all of us, if we have a driver's license or some sort of government issued ID card, we always carry that with us. Now, if you don't have one of those, then a copy of your identification page of your passport. I don't carry your actual passport, because that's a very, very important document. But in the identification page of your passport is a government issued ID, and so have that. Also, now this is also important. Carry evidence of your immigration status or pending process. The best thing to do is to carry immigration documents, because the burden is on you to prove your status. And I never thought I'd say this, but I think that it is wise to carry proof of U.S. citizenship now, whether that be a copy of your identification page of your U.S. passport, copy of your birth certificate, or naturalization certificate.
You're saying this for U.S. citizens.
I'm saying this, for U.S. citizens, because this goes back to that high school student that high school student that was detained and taken into custody during his lunch break. It probably took those couple hours for them to sort out that he was a U.S. citizen. And so those, that's an immigration document. Your passport or birth certificate or naturalization certificate is proof of your U.S. citizenship. So you may want to carry a copy of that. Now, if you're a permanent resident, a legal permanent resident, you have a green card and a legal permanent resident card. And actually, by law, you're supposed to carry that with you at all times anyway. And so carry that, because that is proof of your legal permanent resident status, but then also, make copies of that and have those copies in a safe place. Now, if you are a non-immigrant, and so this is, whether you're here under, let's say, a student visa status, some sort of employment status, or maybe a tourist visitor status, you have what's called an I-94 record. Your I-94 record is the governing document that shows your date of entry and your duration of stay. And so that's your I-94 record is available online. You can go and to the I-94 website. You enter your name, your passport number, and your birth date, and your I-94 record should come up. Have a copy of that, and I'm telling, I'm telling people that I work with for our international employees, just carry a copy of your I-94 with you, as well as a copy of your passport identification page, because that will, if you're stopped, that they'll show proof of your status. Now, if you are not in status, let's say if you are you've overstayed your status, I would say carry a copy of that I-94 anyway. The reason why is because it shows that you entered the country legally, and there are certain benefits that are available to you by showing that you entered the country legally. And now you may still be out of status, you still may be illegal, to use but it's documentation that you have that you can provide to show that that you did enter the country legally and you did have legal status. Copy of your employment authorization document or work permit card, and I have an asterisk next to that. And the reason I have an asterisk next to that is because this is very confusing. We always hear, well, the person had a work permit, that they're legal. Actually, no. A work permit does not confer legal status. A work permit is a legal document, but it isn't permission to stay in the U.S. What it is it's a benefit that is given to somebody who is going through an application process. So just because you have a work permit doesn't mean that your overall case has been processed and adjudicated. So just want to clear that up, that immigration law does allow for people who are going through a process to have a work permit, like they have a pending asylum application or a pending green card adjustment of status application. But a work permit does not mean that an individual is in legal status. So, but I will say, have a copy of that, or have your work permit card with you on that. And then any immigration notice or receipts of pending applications. So if you are in a immigration process or in an immigration application process, have copies of those notices, receipt notices, approval notices, because anything that you can provide that shows what process that you're in and what your immigration history or background is, the better it is for you, because that can give information and inform the immigration officers when they're doing their intake. Okay, we have a better picture of what this person's immigration history is, rather than the hunting and pecking and trying to figure everything out on the back end. And that's what takes a long time. And that's where we have the detention that happens, that is ongoing and ongoing and ongoing. If you have that information, the more information you can provide, the better. So, also, identify trusted contacts and memorize important phone numbers, because if you are detained, you want to know these phone numbers so that you can reach out immediately and notify the people who need to know that you've been detained. And then what we're going to get into next is create a safety plan with your family on what to do if you're put into detention.
Okay. Yeah, very good advice. I know as an attorney who's practiced estate planning here in California for many years, I've advised clients who I know and friends who are, potentially going to be targets of immigration enforcement that, yeah, they should have certain documents from an estate planning perspective ready to go, such as nomination of guardians for their children in case they're detained while their children are, separated from them, durable power of attorney documents for someone who is here in the United States to be able to deal with their property that's left behind if they're detained and deported. I know here in California, our state legislature just passed a bill called AB 495 as well, which gives parents of children some more options when it comes to nominating. It's kind of not a guardianship thing as much as a custodian type of situation for children. And also, even if that parent hasn't gotten around to writing something down, it lets a trusted friend of the family basically deal with the kids. A lot of controversy over that here in California. We've had some groups saying it's going to lead to human trafficking and this kind of thing. But I mean, I think everyone's trying to figure out what's the best way to deal with this if someone's out working and their child's at school, maybe the child is a citizen, or and the parent gets deported. What happens to that child? So what do you recommend beyond what we've just discussed, about the care for family members and personal affairs?
Yeah. So I'm going to cover two things. First is a safety plan, and the second is a child care plan.
Okay.
And so the safety plan is basically the document that you have for you and your family. And so in this plan, you want to identify your family household members, and by name, birth date, even, and then designate the trusted person outside of the home who can be contacted in the event that one of the parents, or maybe perhaps both of the parents, are taken into custody. So so you may want to consider executing a power of attorney document. So for simply put, a power of attorney document is a document that entrusts authority to a trusted person, that basically they step into your shoes, to make decisions regarding property and business and caring for children. I mean, so it's really it is a legal document and authoritative for somebody who can step in your shoes, stand in your shoes, and act on your behalf. Secure important documents. So, birth certificates, naturalizations, anything of importance, just, make sure that they're in a secure place. Designate a safe location outside of the home where the family can go, whether that's a friend's house or some sort of social welfare facility, but designate a place where you can go, and perhaps maybe even a meetup place, because that will at least put everybody on the same page as to let's head to Aunt Susie's house, because that's the designated location to go. And then have important contact information on the plan, whether that's family, trusted people, friends, pastors, and also lawyers and advocacy organizations. And that will be a great resource if you need it, but you have it there on the plan so that the trusted individual that you have designated will have that information there with them. Now, the child care plan. So in the child care plan, you want to identify the children, their ages, and where they go to school. Again, designate the trusted person outside of the household, and they can be what's called a temporary guardian. So they essentially become the caregiver of your children, the minor children. Have school pickup authorization and also healthcare authorization, so that this individual has the authority to go to the school and pick up your child, but also to make healthcare decisions, take the kid to the hospital, or administer medications. So those are two essential elements of a child care plan. And then this can also be incorporated with the other elements of the safety plan.
Yeah, and I would say that there are organizations within, at least I know here in California, that will assist folks with creating these documents. Yeah. And because a lot of folks look at this and they say, I don't know where to start. But and maybe you could mention a couple by name. I know there's the National Immigration Law, what is it, Foundation or something, and they've got a bunch of resources on their website, that type of thing.
Yeah. At the end of our time together, I do have a resource page with websites that have templates of these plans where essentially you can fill in the blank. Yeah. And they're good to go.
Yeah, and I know on our website as well, churchstate.org, we have a page there that has those resources linked as well. So yeah. So let's talk about what happens once a detention or an arrest takes place. What happens then?
Yeah. So we can go to the checklist, and so really let's kind of we have an enforcement action in progress, and I know that this sounds kind of ridiculous, but stay calm, and don't run and don't resist. One thing about that is that can be interpreted as obstruction and can result in criminal charge, but also is you don't want to escalate an already stressful and perhaps even angry situation. You want to de-escalate, and if you can show that you're calm and you're going to de-escalate, I think that will kind of go into the attitude of the agents and officers that are conducting the action. And so that's the rationale for that. Put your hands in plain view. And it's always, it's kind of that rule of, and I remember when I took driver's ed was, when you're pulled over, when you're driving, leave your hands on the steering wheel when the officer approaches the car. And I've so the times I've been pulled over, I've done that, and with good results. And so I think this is it's same thing. Just show you're not armed. You're going to just put your hands out, and again, for de-escalation, let's bring the temperature down on this situation. Now, once you're detained, now is when you want to provide the identification and immigration documents. And again, so here's where that really important piece of providing the documentation of your immigration history and status, that will go a long ways into, again, de-escalating the situation, showing that that you have this information and they don't need to be scrambling to figure out who you are and what your status is. Now, then you could so when someone's detained by law enforcement, you can say, am I free to leave? And if you're detained and they say, well, yeah, we've actually, we're going to let you go. Walk calmly towards the exit, calmly leave the scene. But then if they say, no, you're being detained, Now here is where you exercise your right to remain silent, and you can just you can answer the question of who you are and your identity, and that's it. Say I'm going to exercise my right to remain silent and ask to speak to my lawyer. Now, here's one thing is that immigration law, they're not required to provide a lawyer for you. And so that's because because immigration is not in the area of criminal law, and but they are still bound by the constitutional restrictions of your right to remain silent and right to speak to a lawyer. So you can invoke that.
Mm-hmm.
Do not answer any questions. So they may start interrogating you. Do not answer any questions or agree to sign any documents. And what they may try to do is have you send a document saying that you waive your, perhaps you waive your right to appear before an immigration judge, or you're agreeing to immediate deportation. Don't sign or agree to anything until you've spoken to a lawyer. Don't provide false information or false documents because that's a crime, and things can then escalate and very badly, and it's you'll definitely get criminal charges for that. And then once it's made available to you, call your emergency contact, and then that trusted person that you've designated, and then in turn they should contact legal counsel to advise on what's next. Perhaps you'll be scheduled for a bond hearing for eventual release, or some sort of other timeline for your release, or to straighten out information about your status, and hopefully get released very soon. So that's the checklist that you want to keep in mind. Mainly at the outset, stay calm. Try not to just de-escalate the situation, and hopefully the agents will follow your lead and address you and handle it with a calm demeanor as well.
What about recording the interaction with your cell phone, for example?
Yeah. So actually, we are seeing lots and lots of video now of these arrests. So number one, don't interfere. Don't interfere with the agents. So if you're witnessing an arrest or a raid or detention, don't get in their way. That will result in an obstruction arrest.
And by the way, when you say don't get in the way, I mean, I think there's a certain distance that you're supposed to maintain, and I don't know if it's arbitrary or if it's just kind of whatever the officer decides. But if they're telling you to step back, unless you want to run the risk of being arrested, you probably should listen, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And I don't think that there is a set distance. I think it is arbitrary, but yeah. I mean, you definitely don't want to be in the thick of the action, in the melee. And we've seen videos where people are actually jumping in between agents and the individual being arrested, and they're being tackled. And so don't interfere. But when you're in a public space, you can video, take pictures of everything in plain view, and so and when we say public space, that's out in the open. Obviously, if you're in a private space, then that's restricted. It's but yeah, if you're out in the open, plain view, you have the right to photograph and video anything that's happening, including law enforcement officers and any law enforcement buildings or vehicles. Document everything. So after everything kind of settles down, write down the timeline. What happened? When did it happen? Who was there? If you have contact information of witnesses, get that. If you're able to get names of the agents, get that as well. In the video that I mentioned, where these Border Patrol agents were checking the immigration status of people in the food truck line, they actually identified themselves. They said, "I'm agent so and so. My badge number is 235." And
that's unusual, though, doesn't it? I mean, generally, I've seen law enforcement reluctant to give their name or their badge number.
Yeah, it is unusual, but if you're able to get it,
sure,
get it, yeah. And then take photos of any injuries. And this goes to our litigation discussion, because if there's if there's a definite overreach of power and authority, this could be a point of litigation later. So, and then I put, again, for emphasis, don't interfere with agents. Don't interfere with agents. Because I know when we're seeing a lot of people who, when they video a situation, they're also there to protest the situation. Sure. And they end up getting arrested as well. So don't interfere. Keep a safe distance. Use your good judgment. But absolutely, you have the right to video and photograph anything in plain view.
It is interesting, Andre, though, because you did mention that maybe the ICE policy now is to identify themselves and so on and so forth. But I have seen videos, you may have as well, where an unmarked vehicle pulls up. Sometimes it's like beat up. It looks like something out of whatever, and people jump out with masks on and they start tackling somebody. And so bystanders are wondering, hey, is this really law enforcement, or is this a kidnapping that we're watching? And so they are interfering based on that level. And it seems to me it's, of course, if it is law enforcement, they're going to get away with whatever they do. If it's not, how do you know? And it's kind of, I think we're in a bad spot when, the federal government's choosing to do enforcement like this. It seems like generally when the police, barge into someone's home in the middle of the night, they identify themselves, right? Now, someone could potentially do that and still say they're the police and not actually be the police, but that does help at least. So it does seem that that's a bit of a sticky thing here we're dealing with. How do we know if it's law enforcement or not?
Right. Yeah. And and in fact, we had a situation where a teenager, two teenagers were blocked in a coffee drive-through, and it was they were ICE agents, but the people in the coffee stand, they thought it was a kidnapping in progress. They ran into the restroom and called 911 and said, "There's a crime happening." They've and so that's you're exactly right. I think that we're in a total state of confusion as to the identity of some of the agents when they conduct their operations like that.
So we have a couple questions to come in, and maybe it's a good time to ask, because I think it goes with some of the things we've talked about. One of them was, would an expired U.S. passport be better than carrying, nothing if you're worrying about identifying yourself as a citizen? I would think it would be, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I would say, backing up a bit to our discussion about, your advice that even U.S. citizens should carry proof of citizenship, which I find to be an alarming thing that we would have to say that, honestly. It just doesn't seem like the America that I want to live in personally. But I think one thing people may not understand too is that there is a diminished Fourth Amendment protection within 100 miles of the border, right?
It's we commonly think of the border being just the line between United States and Canada, or the United States and Mexico. Well, actually, it's federal law empowers immigration enforcement to act 100 miles of the border and 100 miles of a coastline. So where I'm sitting in Portland, Oregon, right? Yeah, I mean, we're, I'm within 100 miles of the Pacific Ocean. An immigration border officer can, they can ask for proof of immigration status, just as if they were at the border itself, at a port of entry. But also, and going back, also, federal law does also give immigration agencies wide enforcement powers, really, anywhere, particularly if it's interpreted to be in the national interest. And in his presidential executive orders, that's, you've heard that, he uses that, that it's in the national interest that, and then he'll make his proclamation.
Well, and I think the interesting part, of course, is that, would we have a problem if immigration had checkpoints, for all of us to go through? Yeah, we'd probably all be super annoyed with that. But what makes it, I think, a little more even, to me, un-American is the fact that we're targeting people who look like immigrants. It's not the blonde or blue-eyed folks necessarily. It's people of color generally, right? It seems like in these targeted checks, or the folks who are, they're doubting their citizenship oftentimes tend to be, people who are people of color, it seems like, right? So, so another question came in: how does the church being private property intersect with the right to record public interactions? And do we have a final ruling about church parking lots being private property?
Yeah,
on those.
Yeah. I mean, so any private property, whether it be a church or a private home, the right to record is, can be restricted by the property owner. So that's
sure.
I mean, so if you're on, so that I think that was the gist of the question. But also, parking lots are property. That's private property. That's property owned by the church. And in fact, there was a situation in Wilsonville, Oregon, where ICE was, or ICE agents were just, I don't even know if they were staging an enforcement action, but they just had their cars parked in the Wilsonville High School parking lot. And a group of staff went out to the parking lot and said, "Please leave." And they did. They said, "This is private property. You're not, we don't want you here," and they left. So so we've also instructed our principals and pastors that if the parking lot's being used as a staging area or whatever, it's private property. You can ask them to leave. Now, where I go to church, it's our parking lot is actually a parking lot where some Portland police come and just kind of just take their breaks, park under a tree and stuff. And we actually appreciate when they're in our parking lot.
Sure.
But it is a private space, and you definitely can ask them to leave.
Well, and generally, with spaces that are private but are open to the public, even if that property owner normally opens that space to the public, they can revoke that license, if you will, to be there at any time. This can happen even with disruptive people that come to church, and we say, "You know what, we don't really want you here anymore doing that." So that's. Okay, so Andre, I noticed you have some resources here. Do you want to talk about any of those and just kind of give people, tell them what they can find at those websites?
Yeah. So the National Immigration Law Center, they have a rapid response line. This is the phone number that I would recommend that be put on a safety plan. Okay. And they not only have very helpful resources, but they also, I think, can get in touch with legal assistance in a in a rapid manner. So then I'm going to jump down to the third one, Immigration Advocates Directory. This is a great resource that identifies organizations in a local area. So so if you follow that address, it'll pull up a map of the United States, and you can click on the state that you're in, and then I think then you can localize it down to your city or county, and it will identify immigration assistance organizations in your community that will be available to you. And so so that's also a good resource. And then the American Immigration Council, that one has great resources on having the safety plan, childcare plan templates, but also information on what's next for a bond hearing or a deportation proceeding, and kind of going into more detail about knowing what rights you have in those processes. So that one's a good resource. But there's you can Google and you can pull up all kinds of organizations and resources, but these are the ones I think that are the most informative and beneficial.
Do any of these organizations offer pro bono legal representation for immigrants who are in removal proceedings, that kind of thing?
So the Immigration Advocates Directory will have information on whether it's pro bono or sliding scale, a reduced rate. So that the directory is the place to go to find those organizations.
Okay. Let's see. We've got another question here. Someone is saying it looks like people are being detained even when you tell them that you're a citizen. What can we do? Meaning they are racial profiling just your skin color. Yeah. What are your thoughts on what people can actually do? I mean, preventatively, I don't know that there's much you can do, right? I mean, once you get detained, you got to show them your proof of citizenship. Hopefully that'll be good and they'll let you go. Is there, we talked earlier, is there recourse afterwards, and that's being developed, the law, we're kind of going to see where that goes, right?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, and so, there's videos of people who are being yanked out of their cars and they're yelling, "I'm a citizen, I'm a US citizen." And the agents are just like, well, we don't care. And so really the information that we provided here tonight are really kind of defensive measures. Kind of just get okay. Well, if we need to be one step ahead, then I'll carry a copy of my U.S. passport ID page or my U.S. birth certificate or whatever. So
or just don't leave the house. Maybe that
right.
That was a joke, but I mean, I think some people are having to think about very practical things. Andre, to wrap it up, first off, I want to say thank you for taking the time to do this. Your time is valuable, and your expertise in this area is important. And thank you for sharing, with us, with our viewers. This will be on our YouTube page as a resource. Again, I want to tell our viewers this is not legal advice. You can't. You need to look at your situation individually. Go talk with an immigration attorney to get their advice about your particular situation. But hopefully, there's been some good general information here and practical steps you can take to prepare for immigration enforcement. Andre, any closing thoughts, whether legal or you want to talk kind of about just how we as Christians can maybe support our immigrant brothers and sisters even during this time, anything like that?
It's just the anxiety is just off the charts, and these are not only our brothers and sisters as in faith, but also as humans, but they're also God's children, and so as we may not be we may not all be lawyers, but But we're certainly human beings, and so let's kind of let's see our brothers and sisters and the world in that light that Christ called us to view and to be, and so yeah, that's wish we didn't have to have this conversation, but let's see where God can lead and to provide that love and compassion to others.
Yeah, absolutely. Good thoughts. And I think, as the Church of Christ, the Christian church is positioned in the right place to be a place where we can be a place to welcome people, to show this love for all people, and including immigrants, right? That's what we need to be during this time, I feel like, right? And so that's why we've had this webinar tonight. Hopefully it's going to be helpful to somebody out there, or to someone who wants to help, someone who is an immigrant. So thanks for watching. And I just want to tell our viewers that we're glad you joined us tonight. And Andre, thank you again. And with that, we'll go ahead and sign off. Hope you have a good evening, everyone.
And happy Thanksgiving.
And happy Thanksgiving. That's right.